Welcome to the Fund Your Retirement podcast.
The reason this is happening is not because of some sinister Russian plot or the Chinese doing whatever. It's the money printing actions of
over the last many years.
It's beginning to come out, and so and if I may, without wanting to veer too much towards the political, the real tragedy is going back to John Maynard Keynes. Not one man in a million understands inflation and understands all the stuff we're talking about. Is the electorate think that the solution, whether this is in Germany or America or the UK, most of the electorate think the solution is for the government to spend more money. The cost of living crisis, my energy bills are, what are you going to do, Boris? What are you going to do, Rishi? Give me a check, give me a handout. That is precisely what has caused the problem. Yeah. The more that governments invent funny money out of thin air to give a certain percentage of the population who are suffering more money, the more inflation is going to go up. And it's actually a real tragedy that most people are voting for precisely the course of action that's going to make it even worse. And actually what we need is tight money, is real money, is a return to sound money, and for far more people to be financially literate and understand that that's what's driving these things.
There's two big things that I think people need to understand as well, and that's inflation and the government pension systems, which we wrote about extensively in the How to Own the World, which is a great book, by the way. I've read it. I love it. It's brilliant. And
thank you.
Why I've reached out to you. I recommend everyone go and read that book if you haven't. So, if I read out a quote from one of the books here on pension systems, if that's all right. So I'm just going to read it out here for everyone who's watching. Pension systems all over the world are essentially bankrupt. This is a controversial statement, but completely factual nevertheless, with very few exceptions. Wherever you live today, you absolutely cannot count on being able to live on government handouts for the rest of your life when you stop working. Nearly every Western government is effectively bankrupt, and debt per capita in the US of 2015 was $44,000. Today, at 2022, it's $60,000.
Yeah. Well, the insight, and again, the reason why it's a cold, hard fact and not something to be debated is down to demographics. And when Britain was the second country in the world to have a state pension system, the Germans just beat us to it in 1909. And it was basically for anybody over the age of 70. It was a wonderful invention at a time where, people were going down the mines and working in shipyards. And society was pretty brutal, right? And it was even worse 100 years before that. But it was a very enlightened, new idea that was a wonderful thing that society was becoming wealthy enough to provide. But it was providing a basic cover for anybody over the age of 70. Life expectancy in 1909 was 47. Now that's obviously skewed by infant mortality because a lot more kids died before their fifth birthday than do nowadays. But still, there weren't many people making it to 70 and taking a government pension versus people working and paying tax. There was a much easier relationship. Now, Japan, at the end of the Second World War, when they put in place a pension system, had something like, I think it's 26 workers for every potential pensioner. And right now, it's more like 2. And the same has happened everywhere, right? And scientists are telling us, and I know this pretty well from working in the biotech space, that basically today, children born today are likely to be centurions. They're likely to live to 100 and beyond, right? All sorts of reasons. And a lot of people born, hopefully of our age. I'm a bit older than you, so I don't want to tie you with that brush.
You're not?
Oh, okay. Well, sorry, then I don't want to be patronising.
No, we're very similar ages.
Well, you like me, I like to think that we both look quite young then, which is always good. But moving swiftly on. But if you're going to live to 100 and you aspire to retire at a conventional retirement age of anywhere between 55 and 65, mathematically, someone is going to have to fund several decades of you being able to feed yourself, clothe yourself, pay for utility bill, electricity bills, and everything else. And because of the way governments have behaved all over the world for the last, 5 decades or so, they're really not going to be able to afford to do that. And that's a big part of what's driving this cost of living crisis and inflation, because what they've done to try and the way they've tried to winkle out of that problem, which is basically that society as a whole is not putting by enough for the future, is by printing funny money. And that's also why crypto's now, nearly $2 trillion of market cap for crypto, is that there's just, and properties are all, how can the UK be confronting a massive recession and dealing with Ukraine and cost of living crisis and house prices be at all-time highs? consistently at all-time highs because it's denominated in money that's increasingly worth less. So, people say, oh, my house is, going up loads. Well, that's great, except if you think that a pint of beer in central London when I graduated from university was £1.50 and now it's £5.50.
Yeah.
So you're not making real wealth. You're just owning something that's depreciated. There's a difference between nominal and real value and wealth, basically. And so that pensions crisis is a really serious problem. That's the bad news. The good news is, if you like, I often talk about the fact that we're potentially in a race between Mad Max and Star Trek. So, a sort of
great analogy, I like that.
It's either going to be a dystopian future where we're all clamoring over each other for supplies of water and it feels a bit like that at the moment, doesn't it? The cost of electricity and gas and Ukraine going on and everything else. But actually, I often do a presentation about how human progress is the most important investment theme in history, and I think what will save us is tech and biotech. So all that money, all that funny money that's being printed could well get soaked up by real value. And we've already had examples of that. Why is Apple a $3 trillion company? Well, partly because there's lots of dollars floating around,
yeah.
And it's a nominal thing. But it's actually partly because they've sold how many billion iPhones. And, I'm talking to you on an iMac and, blah, blah, blah. And they've actually created trillions of real economic value. So, so the point there, going back to what people should do is, so if you want to save your retirement and be able to actually live on the proceeds of what you've made over a lifetime of investing, or let's say 3 decades of investing from your 20s or 30s until your 50s or 60s, depending on when you fire the gun, investing in companies, equities, is absolutely crucial. Because for you have got to benefit from a better than inflation performance of your money and benefit from that growth. That's why my book's called How to Own the World. The world is growing. That's the good news. You've got to really do that in a pretty concerted way. And then the other comment to make about that sort of big picture is, and it's the more people who do this, the more capital is available for companies to cure cancer or build robotics to care for elderly people in care homes, or build under ocean pipelines to take solar power from the Sahara to the UK, or any number of other magnificent things that are going to actually solve these problems and make all of our lives much better. And to me, it's a tragedy that we've had several decades of people governments and private individuals using far too much debt, borrowing money and having far too little going into equities and funding things like companies that are solving human problems. It's not quite true, because obviously the S&P and lots of headline equities have done very well. But again, I'm rambling again, but broadly, if every person, the good news is that any person who takes responsibility for sorting this out and does it for 10, 20, 30 years has a very good chance of being okay, notwithstanding the fact the government will not be able to do it for you anymore.
I mean, the stock market's been around for what, 1600s, I think, is the first record.
Yeah, Amsterdam was roughly that sort of time. Early 1700s in London, in the coffee shops of London, yeah.
Yeah, so it's been around.
Niall Ferguson, who's a Harvard professor of economic history and a brilliant person who everybody should read, he describes financial markets, the bond market and the equity market, as one of the killer apps of modernity. I mean, ultimately, they're just an underlying technology that allows us to pool capital to, we would never have aeroplanes or skyscrapers or bridges, big bridges, or any of the, or frankly, you walk into Boots, right? And all the things in Boots, like razor blades and tissues. I mean, all these things that we just completely take for granted, none of them would exist in the shape and form that they're in now and be as inexpensive as a share of what we earn every month, no matter what we earn. Compared to our forebears, for whom life was grindingly poor and difficult, right?
Yeah.
And all of that massive uplift in human experience would not have been possible without the killer apps of equity and bond markets. And I think, it does that, and it also enables us to live for 3 or 4 decades of our life without having to work.
Yeah, which is
that's a pretty good invention, right? If people use that invention, and the biggest problem is that too few people are making use of that invention still, even after 2 centuries, whatever it is.
I would like to see, which I think is very unlikely, but I would like to see a bit of an honest conversation from the government about the state of the finances and the pension system, so that they could, actually, I mean, that's essentially putting a noose around the neck, isn't it? Being in power.
Keep voting for Chris, because that's right. In a 5-year electoral cycle, it's the truth that dare not speak its name. Nobody is going to. They're not going to say, all this demographic bulge means that none of you are actually going to get a paid pension. What they're going to do is stand and say, we're taking steps to resolve the current crisis with a quantitative easing program of £1 trillion. Well, they're the same thing, and the quantitative easing is why we've got the cost of living crisis right now, right? But to quote John Maynard Keynes, he said, "Not 1 man in a million understands inflation," and I think that's probably about right, including sadly a lot of our politicians.
Yeah. Well, that's where I was going to go next, inflation, because obviously what we're seeing with the money printing is record high inflations. So, I mean,
and if you'll allow me to be a bit smug, I mean, I did write the first edition of my book 10 years ago, and the message about inflation was in there with all the evidence of economic history and kind of Austrian school economics. And I took quite a lot of criticism for that position, and being naive, having naive theories of monetary inflation. One of my bad reviews accused me of, and here we are sitting here today, and without wanting to crow overly, it's exactly this cost of living crisis is the result of everything I wrote about in that book, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And I think the other thing which people found quite useful from the book was I explained the ways that government, to the point about Turkey's voting for Christmas and having to massage the numbers and be effectively, without wanting to be too controversial, conspiracy theory-ish, fundamentally quite dishonest about what real inflation is. And so on both sides of the Atlantic, government, when they calculate inflation numbers, do three things, which I talked about in the book. They basically do a thing called substitution, a thing called hedonic adjustment, and a thing called geometric weighting. And now I sound like the most boring man in the world, but I mean, just in a nutshell, when if you were to calculate inflation and take 200 different goods and services and see what they cost last year and then what they cost this year, that would give you an idea of what inflation is. Of course, if fillet steak is inconveniently gone up a lot, or cod fish has gone up a lot, what you might do if you're a government and you need to keep inflation numbers artificially lower, dare you suggest, is do something called substitution, which is change the basket. So you might sub out, fillet steak for sausages, or this all sounds a bit random, but it's actually really important for many. It is.
It's important to understand, isn't it? How it's calculated,
And so they substitute things regularly, and they invariably sub out things that are going up in price for things that aren't, right? Which gives a distorted picture of what real inflation is. And the other one is geometric weighting. So healthcare is an area which is inflating massively because there's lots and lots of old people coming on stream all over the world, and they demand a lot of healthcare. Healthcare has had double-digit inflation for many, many years, right? 10, 11, 12, 13% in cost of drugs and hospitals and whatever else. And it's something like 17% of the US economy is the healthcare sector, but it's only about 6% of the inflation calculation. So the other thing you can do is go, oh, that's inconvenient that massive part of our economy is very ridden with inflation. Let's just not put many of those things in the calculation. And then the final one they do is called hedonic adjustment, which is used to adjust about 40% of inflation factors, where basically they make a qualitative assessment of the price of product, which isn't based on the price, but it's based on its functionality. So the example I always use is if a Sony or a Samsung TV is £1,000 this year, like a big 60-inch flat screen TV, next year the new model is also £1,000, but it has a better screen, it has more functionality, it has more
better audio,
better whatever. And what they do is they say, we think this TV is 25% better than the one last year. It's still £1,000, but they put it in at £750 in the inflation calculation.
So it brings it down.
Correct. Now, all of the things I've just said, government statisticians and people who think I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist will push back quite aggressively and say there is a reason for all of those adjustments to be made. There is a valid reason. If products are better, then that is actually deflationary. If you're getting more for your money, on that TV example. But I just think that it's pretty clear. They're highly motivated to make sure the inflation number comes in as low as possible, because look at the reaction when inflation is high. Look what's going on right now. Yesterday in the British elections, and basically that trick's been going on. And you can go online and find lots of very smart, well-credentialed people making the same case. But the simple, whether or not I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist or inflation is structurally higher than most people realize it is, it doesn't really matter. If you want to, you have to beat even the government numbers in order to build wealth and get to a point where you're place.
Well, the thing as well with inflation, while it probably helps the government's insane amount of debts that they're in, but equally, they're going to have a lot of people that they've promised to support in old age who are going to be saying, hey, Mr. Government, we need more money. So it's only going to put more in.
That's exactly what it's almost we're coming to the denouement of that at the moment, because the government can give you as much funny money as it wants because it can invent it out of thin air.
But that's just only fueling inflation, isn't it?
That is why that's why everyone's looking at their energy bills going, what the hell? I mean, for my sins, I went to a really nice restaurant the other night for the first time in a long time, I hasten to add, but I was having meetings in central London. And it's a very nice steak restaurant. And the steak that a year ago was £34, which is pretty punchy to begin with, right? Yeah. For the ribeye was £45.
Right.
And it was the latest in, and I was just like, but the reason this is happening is not because of some sinister Russian plot or the Chinese doing whatever. It's the money printing actions of
over the last many years.
It's beginning to come out, and so and if I may, without wanting to veer too much towards the political, the real tragedy is going back to John Maynard Keynes. Not one man in a million understands inflation and understands all the stuff we're talking about. Is the electorate think that the solution, whether this is in Germany or America or the UK, most of the electorate think the solution is for the government to spend more money. The cost of living crisis, my energy bills are, what are you going to do, Boris? What are you going to do, Rishi? Give me a check, give me a handout. That is precisely what has caused the problem. Yeah. The more that governments invent funny money out of thin air to give a certain percentage of the population who are suffering more money, the more inflation is going to go up. And it's actually a real tragedy that most people are voting for precisely the course of action that's going to make it even worse. And actually what we need is tight money, is real money, is a return to sound money, and for far more people to be financially literate and understand that that's what's driving these things. Anyway, as I say, without wanting, just to be clear, I don't consider myself to be Tory, Labour, whatever. I think we have a cadre we have a political class now all over the world who are professional politicians who've never worked in industry and who are all pretty much as bad as each other, and from where I'm sitting, as economically ignorant as each other. And
I'm going to make a presumption here, but I'm being judgmental because of my own perception of it. But I don't think it really matters who is voted in. We're going to get much of the same that we've always got.
Because it's all gone too far, and there's an awful lot that's been written on this in recent decades. But there is no electoral option for sound money and small government anymore. It doesn't exist, and actually that is, you can criticise people like me, or people who have spent years studying Austrian school economics and understand that fundamental money is, because it causes the reason there's so much conflict in society at the moment is because it's really divisive. If you have loads of inflation, the rich get richer because they're the ones who own all the assets, and the poor get poorer and don't really understand why. And so, and then ironically, the poor ask for more of it. And that is hugely problematic. But we have a political class that are trapped in a state of their own making. And I mean, I genuinely, when you look at some of the things that are being written in the States, for example, modern monetary theory, the idea that the US government can just...
I was going to touch on that.
Well, anybody who makes that case just hasn't studied economic history.
It's madness, isn't it?
Yeah. You can't, if you are conversant with what happened in Weimar Germany in the 20s, or, Hungary in the 50s, or dozens of other places over the last 300 years, but most US congressmen and senators are all for it, because it's like the magic money tree. It's like, oh, we should do this, and here are a couple of academics who've said that it's fine for the following reasons, totally ignoring economic history.
Yeah. Well, part of one of the things that MMT, modern monetary theory, is to control the surplus capital in the economy through taxes, as opposed to the interest rates, which traditionally has been used to control the excess capital in the system. So are you kind of seeing that as well with taxes, though? Like, they are rising, aren't they, in a time where people's disposable income are actually going down as well?
Yeah, because, basically government's share of this is a stat I get into trouble for saying, but as far as my reading and studying has it, basically the British state, if you put everything on balance sheet, all the off-balance sheet funnies to do with motorways and infrastructure projects and everything, if you put everything back on balance sheet and fully account for the gilt market and how much government debt there is and our deficit and everything else, the British government as a percentage of the British economy is a higher percentage than the Russian government was as a percentage of the Russian economy in the mid-80s under communism.
Right.
Because that's something that's changed in the last 40 or whatever it is years, which is just remarkable, because basically any communist country in history, 40-50% of the economy is the black economy, because it's happening in Argentina right now, it happens in Venezuela, it happens wherever that happens. People have to get by and grow food and get
barter.
So
I'll give you this for this sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly right. Or a dual monetary system with an official Argentinian pesos to dollar exchange rate and an unofficial one on the street, which is completely different. So in communist countries, it's always about there's a massive chunk that's the black economy, which basically meant that the Russian communist government in the mid-80s was maybe 50 or 60% of the economy, and in the UK it's much higher than that. If you put everything back now today. So when you have that situation, the solution to that, which, and I don't want to sound overly pessimistic or overly conspiracy theory-ish, because actually I'm quite bullish and excited about, because the solution is that companies like Apple and Google and I'm writing this book about the biotech sector at the moment. Our Future is Biotech is the working title, which I'm hoping to finish literally in the next few days. And a big part of the thesis is that tech created trillions and trillions of dollars of real wealth in the last century, or certainly a few decades, and that biotech's next, because most of the remaining problems that humanity needs to solve involve biological systems, and that's not just curing cancer. That's actually clean energy generation. Growing great fields of algae in the middle of the ocean that we can then turn into aviation fuel and automotive fuel, biofuels, right? That requires biotech companies to do that, and revolutionizing agricultural production so that everybody is as productive as Holland is, rather than the way India or Pakistan or Indonesia are in terms of their agricultural productivity. Engineering, I mean, it's going off piste a bit, but if 20 years from now you can engineer any meat that you want to eat and it's genetically the same as actually a steak or a lobster or a sea bass, but it's genetically the same, it tastes the same, it smells the same, it looks the same, but it's just made in a lab and grown, which, by the way, is a very, very real likelihood. You will be able to rewild 99% of the world's pasture land, which basically means that you've almost, at a stroke, you've got a hell of a long way to curing the problems of environmental degradation and deforestation and everything else. So all of that stuff, that real wealth creation, that human progress theme of solving intractable human problems, will be the thing that counteracts the pickle that governments have got themselves in. So all the idiots. Sorry, I probably shouldn't say that, but all the political class the world over who are spending more than they earn, printing money like it's going out of fashion, and doing all the things that people like Boris Johnson do that people find as unpalatable as I do, will carry on doing that, and bless them. But lots of other people will be doing far more consequential things in the private sector, which will, I hope, eventually solve the problem. Hopefully.
Well, and just to summarize that, if I can, it's individual responsibility, isn't it?
I think that's right. And look, the impact that somebody like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or Bill Gates, I mean, I know they get pilloried and there's lots of anti-billionaire invective at the moment, but ultimately, Amazon gets pilloried for putting small businesses out of business and but that's totally missing the fact that it's created many millions of businesses. It's created the best internet infrastructure the world's ever seen. I mean, we're on Zoom right now. Zoom wouldn't work without Amazon's infrastructure. It's created an incredibly efficient logistics and distribution infrastructure. It's completely, and as a published author, by the way, it's caused many billions more books to be consumed.
I was going to use you as an example there, because you self-published your book on Amazon originally, didn't you? How many people has that book impacted positively?
Exactly, and I'm a small example. There are literally millions of other authors in the world. So, and in the old days, it's the same in the music industry in the 60s. You were either Rolling Stones or the Beatles, right? And that's why those guys all made ridiculous amounts of money. And now it's very hard to make money as a musician, because actually the economic imperative is if you no longer have constricted supply, you have massive supply. Anybody can build a recording studio in their house. There's tons of music. It's really hard to make a living as a musician.
Yeah.
And but So I've really gone off piece there, but as you democratize all these things, that will come back with Web 3.0, by the way, is that people who produce art.
Yeah, I've been looking into that myself. It's pretty cool.
Which will be interesting. But I've completely lost my thread, which is slightly embarrassing. I'm sure.
No, I think as what the internet is now manifesting in what it was meant to do was to give
long tail.
Yeah, we're now into the long tail because small creators and entrepreneurs and business owners can actually have a piece of the larger pie because of the internet.
Well, and that was the point I was making. So thank you for rescuing me. But there's a brilliant guy called Kevin Kelly who founded Wired magazine, and he's like a Californian futurologist who's been right on a ton of stuff, like predicting what would happen with the internet and everything. And he wrote a piece a few years ago called 1,000 True Fans, talking about exactly this point, which is one of the most uplifting and positive and inspiring things I've ever read and become aware of in recent years, which is basically in this era where you can access the long tail, any individual only needs 1,000 true fans that want to buy. If 1,000 people buy 100 quid's worth of stuff off for you each year, you're going to make 100,000 quid a year. That's what we should be teaching our teenagers, right? Not try to go to Oxford and try and go and work become a lawyer, and all that stuff is going to be engendered and facilitated by all this technological advancement I'm talking about, and the biotech and tech sectors. And I think we are going to, hopefully, that will be the antidote to what's going on in the government. But the big overriding point is there's no substitute for financial literacy if you want to ensure that you benefit from these themes and you don't fall foul of, you don't want to be the person who relies on a government that's in all sorts of trouble and thinks, constantly asking, John F. Kennedy said, one of my favorite quotes, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Yeah. And I think everyone needs that mindset because it's never been worse in terms of the government, but it's never been easier, and there's never been a more exciting future. The decade, the exponentials that are going to happen in the next decade, and the people need to be exposed to that to be to look after you and yours, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you can benefit from all that growth that we've just shared there in the last 5-10 minutes just by buying a piece of the company through the stock market.
And that's why stock markets are the killer app of modernity, because they enable you to benefit from the work being done by, you own stock in Apple. How many thousands of employees have Apple got all over the world doing amazing stuff? Yeah. And the other thing is, people, Ricky Gervais's speech that's done the rounds a lot on YouTube. The one. It wasn't the Oscars. It was one of those, the Golden Globe Awards.
The Golden Globe Award, where he absolutely ripped them.
Yeah, which is very funny. And he basically pillories Apple for saying that everybody was taking Apple's coin to be on Apple TV, and Apple, has terrible working conditions for people in Chinese factories and stuff. But the point to make about that is true of a lot of companies and actors in the world, but it's getting less and less true. And I wrote a piece recently on it, which people can find on the opinion page of our website, called "How ESG Are We?" So ESG, basically ethical investing, all about this subject and how nuanced and complicated it is. But broadly, society, people are getting more ESG. People are not like nasty, selfish, rich, greedy old white men. Who ran all of our Fortune 500 companies 50 years ago? Nasty, greedy, rich, old, white, racist white men, right? Yeah. There's still a lot of work. The direction of travel, we're not over the finishing line, but most people, I'm in my mid-40s, and most of my peers care about stuff like that and don't want to buy products that are destroying the environment or hurting people in the developing world. Yeah. And people of our age and stage are now becoming captains of industry, and that's only going to keep going, right? Yeah. Helped by technology.
We've kind of covered a lot of topics there, but one of the last areas I'd like to cover, if that's right with you, would be there is actually another area that you do go against the grain, and that's you're a big proponent of gold and commodities, aren't you? Which is also very sort of, it's not really talked about in the financial profession as a way of investing as well, is it?
Well, you might remember from my book, rather cynically, I make the point that the financial advice industry has not been able to monetize putting people into gold or commodities for most of the history of their existence, right? Yeah. So financial advisors they get paid, or they always traditionally got paid a commission putting people into funds. So they put people into shares and bonds, funds that do that. They didn't got bullion or whatever else was much harder for them to do that. Yeah. So then the other thing, Warren Buffett is famously a bit of a gold bear, And that points up the point. So his mentor was Ben Graham, who was one of the greatest finance writers of the 20th century. And Ben Graham doesn't talk about gold, and people who follow Ben Graham don't use gold in their models because for most of Ben Graham's life, private people were not legally allowed to own gold in the States from 1930, whatever it was, until I can't remember when they changed it, but for many decades. So I think those are just structural reasons why gold and commodities aren't talked about much. I think they are more nowadays, and I mean, obviously they're doing pretty well this year. I think our commodities bit of our funds up 28% or something so far this year.
Yeah.
That might be wildly exaggerated, but it's so it's up.
He's doing okay. He's doing pretty well.
And people always forget as well because gold has done double-digit returns in every major currency in the world for the last 15 years. And too often people which you'll have achieved if you buy it regularly every month, which is what we recommend. Whereas people go, oh, well, it was 1900 in 2011 and it's 1900 now, so I haven't made any money. That's not right.
If you've been buying every month as it drops.
If you bought it at 1150 and 1200 and 1250. So, we didn't recommend that people just wade in and buy loads of gold in 2011 and then, oh, well, you're wrong and it's the same price.
Yeah.
We're very much on record. But the only reason for that position is I think you need to own the world to capture human progress that we've talked about a lot, gone down rabbit holes on. And you need to own inflation because every major government in the world is printing money, as we also discussed. So the easiest way, one way of expressing that is Bitcoin, is crypto. I personally prefer gold because gold's got a 5,000-year track record and crypto doesn't. Yeah. I'm not saying I'm just a complete out-and-out bear of crypto. I think it's really interesting. I'm just saying that crypto to me looks a lot like the dot-com situation in the late 90s. We have no idea who's going to, in the late 90s, you could have bought Excite, Lycos, America Online, or
World.com.
Right? And if you bought Google, well done you, and you've made a hell of a lot of money. But if you bought any of the others, you didn't do so well. And I think exactly the same is true of, Bitcoin, Ether, Cardano, whatever, all the other different stuff that's out there. And I think too few people are really thinking through that reality.
Yeah.
But so my preferred, old-fashioned, conservative, prudent hedge is something that humans have used as a store of value for 5,000 years at least is gold and gold and silver, and that's why I'm a big bull on that.
Yeah, so hedge against inflation, gold and commodities as well, because commodities everyone needs, and if the price of everything is rising, the price of what people need is going to rise as well.
Yeah, so, but I think if you've got quite a lot of money, you can do that. If you invest in commodities directly, I mean.
Yeah.
Of course, if you own really quality companies, if you own an index, you're going to end up owning all the commodity companies in the index.
Yeah.
And that maybe for your average person who hasn't got an awful lot of money and doesn't want to spend their life thinking about should I buy cotton and coffee and wheat and sugar and whatever, or copper and industrial metals and zinc and iron ore, and you get a certain amount of owning the world commodity exposure from owning the MSCI or the S&P.
Owning the companies that operate in the commodity space, you're actually then getting exposure to it, aren't you?
So, but I mean, I think if you're only going to do one thing to get that commodity exposure, gold is a monetary metal, and gold and silver, they have industrial uses as well. So they kind of cover off that base. But I mean, as you know, I unpack that in quite a lot of detail in How to Own the World.
Absolutely, yeah. So again, go and read the book. It's a fantastic book. So.
Buy my book.
Buy the book.
I'd be very grateful to anyone who does. And if anybody who does, the other thing to say is, please, we have a free email list. I only send emails out. In recent months, I've only sent about 3 out in the last 6-7 months because I've been writing the book, and the 80,000 words I've written for the book, I haven't written for my email audience. But we've got a pretty big email list, and you can subscribe for free, and I send stuff out. And also, it takes me a while to reply, but anybody who wants to email me, having read my book, and people, lots of people do every week, please do. It's either hello@plaininglishfinance.com or andrew.craig@plaininglishfinance.com. I do my best to reply, although it can, depending on how busy I am, it can take a while because I'm still trying to reply to everyone. So
yeah, brilliant. So I was actually going to come to, as we finish the end of the podcast there, how can people connect and follow you or learn more? So I mean, have you just summarized it there, or is there somewhere else?
Yeah, I am on Twitter @AndyRuCraig. We're also @PF_UK is the Plain English Finance Twitter handle. And if you find me, you'll find it. We're going to do a lot more tweeting.
Tweeting.
Because as I said, I only went full time on Plain English Finance basically 9 months ago. And since then, I've been writing this book and working on launching this biotech fund and actually raise money for the business. I've been extremely busy and gone a bit dark in terms of social presence and email and stuff, but which is going to come up a lot more in the next few months. But yeah, I think the strongest thing there is our email list. You just go on our website and just put your email address in on the website. It's free, and it's not nor will it ever be a annoying daily bombardment that you end up just deleting every day like so many email lists. I only email I'd say in the last 10 years I've probably averaged 7 to 10 emails a year. Sometimes a few more, sometimes a few less. In the future, it will probably end up being about fortnightly or monthly.
That's a good sort of time lapse, isn't it? Yeah, brilliant. So what I will do is I will make sure all the links to your website so people can sign up to a newsletter. Link to both your books will be in the show notes. So please scroll down, click on either join the newsletter or buy the books, and start your financial journey. Andrew,
very much appreciate it. The only little plug I'll do on that is that my second book, Live on Less, Invest the Rest, you get free ebook and audiobook versions of that if you join our community. So actually, if you're really cynical and a penny pincher, you can join, pay £5, get 30 quid's worth of ebook and audiobook, and then leave for a £5, which there've been a handful of people that have done that over the last few years. But we think our community is I'd like to think it's the best value thing in the UK for a £5 a month. Given that and people can join and leave whenever they want. So please think about that, because you get the book for free anyway.
And where do you access that? Through your website? Can they sign up
on the website? There's a tab that says Your Community, and if you click on Your Community, read about why we think it's got merit, and then you just click to subscribe at the bottom.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you don't have to stop there either. We have more videos on the screen for you and lots more insightful content on our channel and our website fundyourretirement.com. I want to thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.